Todd Monken just did something that has the entire Cleveland media world in absolute chaos. He shut the door, completely. No more access to Shedeur Sanders. No more locker room interviews. No more practice observation. No more friendly background conversations that turn into next-day headlines. The Browns head coach drew a line so hard that reporters who have covered this team for years are suddenly finding themselves on the outside looking in. And the craziest part, Jimmy Haslam, the owner, is backing him completely. This isn't just about protecting a quarterback from tough questions. This is about accountability, because reports claim that behind closed doors, the Browns have compiled a list. Names of reporters, evidence of what they published, documentation of how their coverage crossed the line from criticism into something else entirely. And the people on that list are now finding out what happens when an organization decides it's done playing nice. Mary Kay Cabot, Tony Grossi, Anthony Lima, Rex Ryan, these aren't random personalities. These are the faces of Cleveland Browns coverage, people who have had access to this team for years, who have built their careers on insider information and close relationships with coaches and players. And now, allegedly, they're being frozen out, emails going unreturned, questions getting dodged at press conferences. The cozy pipeline of information that used to flow freely has been shut off completely. And it all comes back to one player, Shedeur Sanders, the 5th overall pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, who became the target of a media firestorm before he ever got a real chance to prove himself. The coverage wasn't just critical, it was relentless, it was personal, and according to those close to the situation, it crossed lines that Monken and Haslam decided they weren't willing to tolerate anymore. But here's what makes this situation so complicated. Was the media wrong to criticize Shedeur? Or was the organization wrong to set him up the way they did? Because that's the part of the story that often gets buried under all the drama. Shedeur Sanders was the 5th overall pick, a quarterback selected that high should be getting first-team reps in preseason, should be working with the starters, should be integrated into the offense from day one. That's how you develop a franchise quarterback. That's how you give someone a real chance to succeed. But the Browns didn't do that. Shedeur got 0 first-team reps in preseason, not one. He was treated like a backup project while the organization handed the starting job to someone else without ever giving their top draft pick a legitimate opportunity to compete for it. And when things didn't go perfectly when he finally did get on the field, the media pounced. But they didn't pounce on the organizational decisions that set him up to struggle. They pounced on Shedeur himself. They questioned his toughness. They questioned his commitment. They turned every small mistake into evidence that maybe the Browns had made the wrong choice. And that's where the frustration inside the building started to build. Because from Monken's perspective, and reportedly from Haslam's as well, the media was ignoring the real story to create a false narrative that generated clicks and controversy instead of truth. Rex Ryan went on live television and absolutely lost it, screaming about how Shedeur wasn't doing enough, how he wasn't ready, how the Browns needed to make a change. This is a guy who's been in professional football forever, who understands how the league works, who knows that rookies need reps and coaching and time to develop. But instead of pointing out that the Browns had failed to give their 5th overall pick the resources he needed, Ryan turned it into a character attack on Shedeur himself. And millions of people watched it. Millions of people heard a respected football mind tear into a rookie who hadn't been given a fair shot. And that narrative started to stick. Then there's Tony Grossi. Shedeur dealt with arm soreness after limited practice reps. This is completely normal. Every quarterback in the NFL experiences arm fatigue at some point. It's part of the position. Your arm is a muscle, and when you're throwing a football repeatedly, especially when you're not getting consistent reps to build up arm strength gradually, soreness happens. It's not a character flaw. It's not evidence of weakness. It's biology. But Grossi turned it into a story. He mocked Shedeur on air. He questioned whether the kid was tough enough to handle the NFL. He suggested that feeling pain was somehow proof that Sanders didn't belong. And the whole time, He ignored the fact that the soreness was a direct result of the organization's decision not to give him proper preparation. Mary Kay Cabot might have done the most damage of all. She's the lead Browns reporter for one of the biggest outlets covering the team. She has credibility, she has a platform, and she used both to push a narrative that Dillon Gabriel should be the starter, that maybe the Browns had made a mistake with Shedeur, that there were character concerns that should make fans worried. She wrote about a speeding ticket and turned it into a story about discipline and maturity. She published pieces that painted Shedeur as narcissistic, as someone who didn't have what it takes to lead an NFL team. And all of this happened before he'd been given a real opportunity to show what he could do on the field. But here's where it gets really interesting, because there's another layer to this story that exposes just how agenda-driven some of this coverage might have been. In a previous controversy, Shedeur was heavily criticized for patting the ball before his throws. Media members and anonymous scouts made it sound like this was a fatal flaw in his mechanics, something that would prevent him from succeeding at the NFL level. It became a talking point that followed him through the entire draft process. Then Fernando Mendoza, a white quarterback, did the exact same thing at his pro day. Same habit, same mechanical quirk, caught on camera for everyone to see. And the response from the media? Silence. Not one article questioning whether it would be a problem. Not one anonymous scout calling it a red flag. Not one piece suggesting it might limit his potential. And then, after the double standard became impossible to ignore, some of those same media members quietly admitted it. On air, almost casually, they said, "Yeah, we probably made too big a deal about Shedeur doing that." No formal retraction. No acknowledgement of how that criticism might have affected his draft stock or public perception. Just a quiet admission that they'd overblown it, buried in a conversation most people probably didn't even hear. That's the kind of thing that makes an organization start keeping receipts, because it's not just unfair coverage, it's evidence of a pattern. Evidence that some of these reporters weren't approaching Shedeur Sanders with the same standards they applied to other quarterbacks. And that's a problem. So how did Shedeur respond to all of this? He didn't, not publicly. He didn't fire back at Rex Ryan. He didn't call out Tony Grossi. He didn't get into a war with Mary Kay Cabot over her coverage. He stayed quiet. He focused on his work. He understood that engaging with the media circus would only feed it, would only give them more material to twist and more opportunities to keep the negative narrative alive. Instead, he waited for his chance. And when it finally came, when he finally got real reps with the first team and a legitimate opportunity to show what he could do, he dominated. He didn't just play well. He proved why the Browns spent a 5th overall pick on him. He showed the arm talent, the decision-making, the poise under pressure that scouts had seen in college. He made the plays that silenced the critics who'd spent months saying he wasn't ready. And then something fascinating happened. The same media members who had been tearing him apart completely flipped. Suddenly, Shedeur Sanders was the future of the franchise. Suddenly, he was unstoppable. Suddenly, all those concerns about his character and toughness and readiness just vanished. Articles that had questioned whether he belonged in the NFL were replaced with pieces praising his potential and predicting stardom. That 180-degree turn is what convinced Todd Monken that the coverage had never been about legitimate journalism. Because if it had been, if the criticism had been based on real analysis and fair evaluation, it wouldn't have disappeared overnight the moment Shedeur proved himself. The fact that it did, the fact that the narrative completely reversed the second he performed well, exposed the whole operation for what it really was: a performance. A media circus designed to generate clicks and controversy, not to inform fans or hold the organization accountable. And that's when Monken made his decision. He wasn't going to let those same reporters who'd spent months creating false narratives have unlimited access to Shedeur anymore. He wasn't going to allow them to twist words, manufacture drama, or turn every practice observation into a headline that undermined his quarterback's confidence. He shut the door. And according to reports, Jimmy Haslam backed him completely, because the owner had been watching too. He'd seen the coverage. He'd seen how unfair it was, and he'd apparently been keeping his own list of who said what and when. Now, is this the right move? That's where things get complicated. Because on one hand, coaches and organizations shouldn't be able to completely control media access just because they don't like criticism. Freedom of the press matters. Accountability matters. Reporters should be able to ask tough questions and publish stories that make teams uncomfortable. That's part of their job. But on the other hand, there's a difference between tough questions and targeted attacks. There's a difference between holding an organization accountable and creating false narratives for clicks. And if the Browns genuinely believe that certain reporters cross that line, then they have a responsibility to protect their players from it. Shedeur Sanders is at a crucial point in his development. Every rep he takes, every conversation he has with coaches, every bit of confidence he builds matters right now. If the media environment around him is toxic, if he's constantly dealing with reporters looking for the next controversy instead of the next story, that affects his ability to grow. Monken isn't trying to hide failures or avoid accountability. He's trying to create an environment where his quarterback can focus on football without constantly having to defend himself against attacks that aren't based in reality. The reporters who are now frozen out have a different perspective, obviously. They'd argue that they were doing their jobs, that they were raising legitimate concerns about a quarterback who wasn't performing up to expectations. They'd say that if Shedeur couldn't handle media criticism, he wasn't tough enough for the NFL anyway. They'd point to their years of experience covering the team and suggest that Monken and Haslam are being overly sensitive. And maybe there's some truth to that. Maybe some of the criticism was fair, even if it felt harsh. But the problem is, when you look at the pattern, when you look at the double standards and the narrative reversals, and the way the coverage shifted the moment Shedeur proved himself, it's hard not to see something else going on. The ball padding controversy is the perfect example. If that was a real concern, it should have been raised consistently for every quarterback who does it. It should still be a talking point when other prospects show the same habit. But it's not. It was only a problem when it was Shedeur Sanders. And when that gets pointed out, when the inconsistency becomes impossible to deny, the response isn't to address it seriously. It's a casual, yeah, we probably overdid it, buried in a conversation most people won't hear. That's not accountability. That's damage control. And that's why Monken drew the line. Because if the media isn't going to hold itself accountable, if reporters are going to create false narratives and then quietly admit they were wrong without any real consequences, then the organization has to step in. They have to protect their players. They have to control the environment. And that's exactly what they're doing now. Mary Kay Cabot, Tony Grossi, Rex Ryan, and others reportedly on that list are finding out that access isn't a right, it's a privilege. And when you abuse that privilege, when you use it to tear down a player instead of covering the team fairly, you lose it. The broader NFL world is watching this situation closely, because if the Browns get away with freezing out reporters who were critical of their quarterback, other teams might try the same thing. That's a slippery slope. It could lead to an environment where teams only give access to friendly media, where tough questions never get asked, where fans only hear the version of the story that the organization wants them to hear. That would be bad for journalism and bad for accountability. But at the same time, if reporters know they can say whatever they want without consequences, if they can create false narratives and attack players unfairly and never face any pushback, that's bad for the players and bad for the truth. So where's the balance? How do you protect players from unfair media attacks while still preserving the important role that journalism plays in holding powerful organizations accountable? That's the question the Browns are trying to answer right now. And the answer they've settled on is this: if you cover the team fairly, you keep your access. If you cross the line into personal attacks and false narratives, you lose it. Whether that's the right standard or whether it gives organizations too much power is something the rest of the league is going to have to figure out. What's clear right now is that Shedeur Sanders is finally in an environment where he can focus on football. The noise has been turned down. The reporters who spent months trying to tear him down are on the outside. And inside that building, he's working with coaches who believe in him, teammates who respect him, and an ownership group that's willing to go to bat for him. That's the kind of environment where young quarterbacks develop into stars. That's the kind of protection that actually matters. Todd Monken didn't shut the door because he's afraid of criticism. He shut it because he watched what happened last season and decided it wasn't going to happen again. He saw a rookie quarterback get 0 first-team reps and then get blamed when he struggled. He saw media members ignore organizational failures to create a more exciting story about a player failing. He saw double standards, narrative reversals, and agenda-driven coverage masquerading as journalism. And he decided that Shedeur Sanders deserved better. Whether you think he made the right call depends on where you stand on the bigger question of media access and accountability. But one thing's for sure, the Cleveland media landscape has changed, and Shedeur Sanders is the reason why.